Up next, we have a panel discussion on diversity and inclusion that will explore overlooked talent pools and building a culture of inclusion. On this panel, you will hear from Scott Beth, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Intuit, Keith Hutchison, Senior Vice President, U.S. Human Resources and Chief Diversity Officer for National Grid, Vanessa Abrams-John, Executive Director of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Talent Acquisition at Linde. And our moderator today is Amy Etten, Vice President, Client Services, STEM Connector. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Etten, and I'm Vice President for Client Services at STEM Connector. I truly am honored to be moderating this important panel discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. The need to build a STEM talent workforce that is diverse in race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status has been central to STEM Connector's work since its inception. Our intuition tells us, and data confirm, that varied perspectives generate better ideas for solving the world's most complex problems. And better ideas translate into competitive advantage and improved financial performance. We are incredibly fortunate to have three DE&I leaders on our panel today who collectively hold decades of experience leading their company's efforts to recognize and embrace differences, to ensure that job candidates and employees alike feel welcome and valued, and provide opportunities for all of their colleagues to develop and thrive. COVID-19 has shined a nearly blinding spotlight on inequity and injustice, the uncomfortable truths of our history, and the systems that support it. The focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion is more important than ever, and I am delighted to be here with our three panelists: Vanessa Abrams-John, Executive Director of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Talent Acquisition at Linde; Scott Beth, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Intuit; and Keith Hutchison, Senior Vice President, Human Resources and Chief Diversity Officer, National Grid. Panelists, over the past several months, we have seen more and more companies adding and elevating DE&I roles within their organizations. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, your roles specifically are not new. I'd love to hear how you all came to your positions and about the key drivers that shaped the DE&I strategies in your respective companies. Scott, let's start with you and your work at Intuit.
Well, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and joining me are three gardeners that just showed up that are mowing the lawn. So my apologies for any short-term background noise that you might be hearing. What I'd love to do is to start the conversation to talk about the strategy that we've created for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we approach that development of the strategy. After the summit, I encourage you to go to ceoaction.com. We're one of 1,000 signatories of the CEO Action Pledge, and part of that pledge is to submit best cases and examples of our work, and our strategy is published on that website, so you can refer to everything that I'm going to share with you right now. The 6-part strategy that we have is tone at the top, making sure that we have specific metrics established, and our CEO and CEO staff actively talk about and are advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second part is data analysis, including survey instruments, because we want our work in this area to be analytically based. The third piece is ensuring equity across the entire talent lifecycle, including opening the aperture of diverse talent. And it's not just the inspiring people to join us, but it's keeping people through retention programs and advancement and mobility. Once people join us, we want them to stay. The fourth piece is education at all levels in the company. Fifth is communication, both inside and outside the company. And finally, creating a culture of community and belonging. And this is where we're really leaning into, is making sure that our leaders are able to connect with our employees and to create that bond and ensure that all voices are heard, so people feel like they can bring their full authentic selves to work. And Amy, the way that we've approached this is through a framework that I call head, hearts, and hands. The head part is that we have data scientists looking at um, performance evaluation ratings, our ability to have diverse slates of candidates, uh, promotion mobility and attrition rates. The hard piece is that deep empathy. I've personally have talked to and interviewed 170 employees, mostly women in technology, to understand their experience. I've heard things like, "This is the place where I always want to be," to "I don't see myself in the face of leadership. And how can there be more representation at the most senior levels so that I can aspire to grow my career here?" Um, and then finally, the hands piece is that we have to put into action the analysis and this deep empathy. And three quick examples. So we hosted a trans summit this year. We flew in back in January, all of our trans employees from around the world, and they met with our CEO and senior executive staff, and it resulted in improved healthcare benefits following the WPATH protocol. The second is that we launched a new program to bring more engineers with autism into our company. 40 of our technology managers yesterday interviewed 20 early career technologists with autism, and the unemployment rate for engineers with autism is 85%. And these are brilliant engineers. And then finally, we've created a racial equity advancement leadership team to set the course for racial equality in the company that is made up of 9 Black leaders that are setting our recommendations and our path forward.
Thank you so much, Scott. That's an extraordinarily comprehensive approach, which makes perfect sense because this is hardly a simple problem. So a simple solution would definitely not get the job done. Vanessa, let's hear from you. Linde is a global industrial gas company. How have you gone about creating a strategy that works not only in the US, but around the world?
First of all, thank you, Amy, and welcome to my fellow panelists today. I have to confess that when Scott started by talking about the gardeners mowing the lawn, I thought he was referring to the three of us in some sort of analogy that we're trying to create this culture of inclusion in our companies by mowing lawns. But I think, I would like to take a different approach in my answer, in the sense that for an old, long tenured company that has been around for over 100 years, we were, sort of the old school engineering company that hired mainly men. For us to implement this role where I'm sitting today was something new and different for the company. People have traditionally worked at the company until their retirement. We had employees who had been there over 30 years. And so this was a moment of transformation for our company. I've been in the role for 8 years. I started off in our law department as an attorney. It certainly was a vision of our now CEO, who became CEO at the time that I entered into this role. So I was able to start with a blank slate and create the role into what it is today. Similar to Scott, we focus on certain pillars under the premise and under the philosophy that we wanted to provide an environment of equal opportunities. This was before COVID. This was before our social justice reckoning conversations this summer, where we've now pivoted towards more of focusing on equity as opposed to equal opportunities. And I'll discuss that a little bit later on. But I think we started off by looking at the traditional D&I interventions and tactics that started in the 90s, ERGs, unconscious bias training, all of those things that most companies felt were the right things to do at the time to really transform companies. Being in the B2B space, we didn't have that business imperative of being a consumer-facing brand. So we really had to work on training and developing changing mindsets of managers who had been successful for decades in our company. So we focused on 5 areas, similar to Scott. we wanted to, sort of pull that hood up of the car and look at the policies and processes in talent management. So everything from hiring to how we design development programs, to who attends development programs, how we share job opportunities internally, who gets promoted, who gets tapped on the shoulders, to performance management, really taking a second look at the biases that are hidden within our performance management system. So that was the first thing we wanted to do. And it's surprising how sort of dismantling those processes can create disruption within an organization that is successful. The second thing that we looked at was our training programs. Rather than have sort of a separate silo for diversity training programs, we wanted to embed it within our leadership training programs so that it was considered a leadership competency and capability. So really just changing the organization's mindset around what is considered a leadership competency. The third thing we focused on is, how do we hold business leaders accountable? How do we pivot from having D&I be an HR initiative to really being owned by the business? So we sort of follow the model that we did with other things like productivity and safety, creating, scorecards, tracking and reporting, embedding results into performance management. And that also, as you can imagine, created some disruption. The fifth thing is our brand. As a B2B company, although we're very successful, we really wanted to establish our brand presence with students, right? With talent, with this growing body of diverse talent that was out there in the marketplace that didn't really know who we were. So it meant really going to, certain career fairs, being consistent, really reaching out to candidates, looking at who we were bringing to those career fairs, really reaching out to the student body and the talent that was out there, going on social media. This was something new for our company. So we worked within those 5 areas to really advance and evolve our D&I programs. But I'm going to wait for your other question later to talk about the pivot that we had to make this year towards equity, towards sort of confronting some traditional things that were cementing biases within our systems and our structures and our processes, and really having some uncomfortable conversations to transform the organization towards true inclusion, as opposed to just doing the traditional interventions that we've been doing for the past decade.
Thank you. I can imagine that there are tremendous pros and cons to starting with a clean slate. But again, I'm hearing that this is another very multifaceted strategy that works across ages and stages of your sort of employee life cycle. So very interesting. Keith, I'd like to turn to you. So National Grid in the United States has a regional focus in New York, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. You also employ a large number of unionized workers. And so posing the same question to you as I did to Scott and Vanessa, plus, how do these factors influence your DE&I strategy?
Sure, and thanks for the question. Thanks for hosting the summit virtually this year. It's been a great success so far. So well done to you and the team, Amy. National Grid. We serve 20 million customers in the Northeast United States. I think the intersection between what we do with our customers and our communities and our colleagues internally has never been greater, and we'll talk about that more given the events of this year. But for us, we center our DEI strategy around sort of a few very simple principles. Our core values in our organization is to always do the right thing, whether that's around safety, whether it's around consistency of our processes and policies. It's to make things happen. So honor our commitments, drive better decision making much faster within our organization. And find a better way. So to always be looking creatively and innovatively at ways that we can improve the customer experience, the colleague experience, through either automation, new technology. And so starting at that level where those are our values, we then sort of unpack that, say, how do we then translate that into sort of core strategy for DEI? And where we began very simply was around saying, look, we need to unpack the employee life cycle. How do we attract, recruit, onboard, develop, performance manage, promote, and retain diverse talent within our organization? And so we looked very much at that through the lens of, are we doing the right thing? Can we find a better way to improve upon those processes? And then once we've made those decisions, how do we make it happen quickly so that we don't paralyze ourselves in just solutioning and trying to achieve perfection? The culture of National Grid is somewhat of a challenge because we are an engineering company. We employ a lot of people who are striving every day for perfection in developing solutions for all of our customers. Safety is our number one priority. And what that does from a cultural perspective is it means that we can be cautious and it means we can be risk averse. And what that can occasionally do, which is what we sometimes have as a challenge, is then saying, look, when we identify an opportunity to make an improvement, we might just get 80% of the way there. Let's just get it done. But we have a lot of people who, God bless them, want to get to that 100% perfect solution. Otherwise, it's not for purpose. And so we're in this process at the moment of trying to evolve our culture to be much more about making faster decisions, giving more autonomy to leaders that when they identify opportunities that could improve the experience of their colleagues or their team members, that they can go ahead and do it. But to the point that's already been made by Vanessa and Scott, we're certainly nowhere near perfect. And one of the things that we've begun this month is an independent audit of all of our employee life cycle, examining all of those parts of the process around attraction, recruitment, promotion, how we disseminate pay increases and merit cycle awards every year. And we want that done independently. I own HR and the employee life cycle, and there's a risk that I could overlook or become defensive, as my team may do if we were auditing ourselves. And so the benefit of an independent audit is that, one, I can tell my team, we're not as good as we think we are. Otherwise, we would not have employees sharing the experiences that they have over the last few months, telling us where they've had instances where they've not felt fairly or equitably treated. So we need somebody independently to tell us where we are falling short. And then we need to be ready and prepared to take the necessary actions to get better at this, because our employees, our customers, our communities are depending on it.
Thank you. You said two things in particular that really struck me. One, that your strategy is founded in simple principles, which I love, because simple can often be best, but I can also imagine there is nothing simple about balancing all of the competing priorities and different personality types. And I commend you for taking on this independent audit, because it's scary. You never know, as you said, you never know what you're going to find. And so
Right.
I think I think it really speaks volumes to who you are as a company. And I also think it's a great example for other companies to follow. So moving on to something that everyone has hinted at, the global pandemic. It has not only raised awareness of social injustice and increased the sense of urgency around solutions, it has also created new DE&I challenges. For example, having a remote workforce can make it difficult to maintain a company culture. And so I'd like to hear from you about some of your greatest challenges, and how does your work look differently today than it did, say 6 months ago? If we can, trying to make it equitable here, this time we'll start with Vanessa.
Thank you, Amy. This year has been transformational, and out of every crisis comes opportunity. And I remember when in hindsight, we were hit by a double pandemic. One, first with COVID and having a workforce that had to go inward and get out of that social face-to-face environment. And the second pandemic was, social injustice, the reckoning. It wasn't that social injustice was new. It's just that it was thrusted to the forefront of our consciousness in a way that we could not avoid. And so I remember thinking about how do we continue to foster inclusion when we were only dealing with COVID, right? So this was back in April, May. We were all working from home. I struggled with how do I keep underrepresented groups, disenfranchised groups, marginalized groups on the forefront of people's minds now that we're home, working from home. And by the way, not everybody was working from home. We are an industrial gases business, so our truck drivers were still delivering product. We have a healthcare business that was still servicing COVID patients. So we pivoted pretty quickly and started hosting virtual calls. We created a hashtag Learning Together program. We started sort of sending out the message about how to be inclusive while being virtual. We were training managers, and then we got hit with a second pandemic. And for us, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity as an organization to really pivot from the usual platitudes of D&I programming, the usual standard D&I interventions and practices towards really true inclusion, right? Having a conversation around equity as opposed to the usual, we're providing equal opportunities. We have diverse slates of candidates. We, making sure that every candidate slate has gender diversity and racial diversity, towards really unpeeling that onion to say, hey, here are some issues that impact people differently because of our history, because of some uncomfortable truths that we were not able to talk about before this summer. And guess what? People were willing to listen. It was, as I said, a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to start having these hard conversations internally, but we didn't want to rush it. We wanted to get it right. We know that there were many companies, and I applaud them, who went straight out the box with lots of hashtags on social media, lots of conversations and so on. But I really wanted to be strategic. I really wanted the buy-in of our leaders, our middle managers, our line leaders, and most importantly, our marginalized communities that were feeling stressed and impacted by what was going on. So we came up with a 3-pronged solution that we got buy-in from for everyone. Our CEO, who traditionally does not make public statements, made a statement of empathy and support for communities that the double pandemic really sort of laid bare all the injustices, the gaps in education, the gaps in wealth, the gaps in all the areas of life that we take for granted. The second thing we wanted to do was really sit down with our foundation leaders to talk about a multi-pronged giving approach, to not just go with the latest and greatest hashtagged organization, but to sit down and think about what are some things in society that we can help to change as a successful company. How can we impact our own communities? And we ended up focusing on pillars of education. We wanted to close education gaps. We wanted to help to foster voter education and voter rights. And we also wanted to focus on criminal justice reform. So we supported, I'm not going to call the names of the organizations here, but we reached out to some organizations that we entered into some multi-year giving initiatives with. We didn't announce it publicly. We announced it internally because it was something that we felt that we weren't just going with the trendiest organization, but we really wanted to think about how we can change our communities and thereby change people's lives, change the lives of our employees who were coming to work every day stressed, having to deal with family members who were impacted by COVID, family members who were losing jobs. And we know it's no secret what communities were impacted the most. So the third thing we did is we designed some internal conversations. We wanted to keep it apolitical, We wanted to keep it sort of, free of partisan politics. So we focused on the internal things that we could do as an organization to really drive true inclusion. We invited leaders, middle managers and leaders, and our African American community. And we had the calls every Wednesday in July at a certain time. People could join at their will. No one was forced to join. And what we found is that we had to add more sessions. There was such a pull for the conversations. We had sharing of stories. We had commitment from leaders. We had our CEO kicking off some of the sessions. I mean, it was so powerful that we felt we had to replicate it and cascade it down into smaller groups within some of our business units. But out of that, we're a company like the other two companies represented here of engineers. We like to have goals. We like to have actions. We like to have things that we can measure. We like to have SMART goals. So we came up with 3 actionable goals that we are now working on. One was to create a U.S. task force on racial equality. It's comprised of business leaders in the U.S. and representatives from each of our ERGs. The group's mission is to work on advancing underrepresented talent within their businesses, to provide sponsorship and support career development for high-performing talent. The second thing we did is create a 10-year goal for developing leaders from underrepresented groups. I'm not going to share the goal publicly, but the goal was shared internally. And the third thing is to overhaul our training programs to add concepts of anti-racism and microaggression, and then to mandate that every manager take the training by the end of this year. These are things that people were able to rally around, support. They're actionable, they're measurable, and we feel good about where we are. We didn't come out the box with the biggest donation. We didn't come out the box with the fastest meeting, but we were thoughtful, we were careful, we sought the buy-in, and we're very happy with where we are. We wanted to get away from the usual platitudes of D&I programming and really focus on peeling back this onion that, in 8 years of doing this work, it's a never-ending onion. Right? The work is never done. It takes different shapes and forms each year, but we're really excited about where we are as an organization. We have momentum. People are feeling good. People feel supported. And I'm happy to share with you in a few months where we ended up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What I really appreciate about what you said about your thoughtful, sort of deliberate approach was that I suspect that it really fits with who you are as a company, and therefore will be much more sustainable over time and ultimately more effective. So,
it has to fit our personality as a company. So that's who we are. We're not about being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We're very happy with sort of being successful behind the scenes and doing what we do best, which is to really be strategic and come up with measurable, impactful initiatives.
Thank you so much. Keith, how about you? How does Vanessa's experience compare to yours in this time?
Yeah, very similar. I think I think the experience before the events of May with the killing of George Floyd, and the sort of pivot beyond that, which I think was a watershed moment for most organizations, not just here in the US, but many, our UK company as well, that was, always focusing on D&I, but probably was not scrutinized, or many leaders in the organization probably weren't participative in the process or in a lot of the activities that were going on there, to now where all leaders are judging the DEI practice and the HR function to say we should be doing more. And you think, well, where was that energy and enthusiasm a year ago when I needed budget for some of the investments we needed to make, where you said that you just didn't have enough deep enough pockets? So we're capitalizing on that focus is really important. The one thing I will say that's very similar to Vanessa, we were under enormous pressure from many of our colleagues to come out with an action plan and be really definitive and declarative about what we're going to do. And I was at pains with our executive team to say, I don't want to do that yet. we're not ready. And the reason we're not ready is we do not fully understand the experience of our colleagues in this company yet. And if we go out with an action plan, it will be tone deaf, it will feel corporate, it'll feel disconnected from the reality of many of our colleagues and the experience that they're having. And so we ended up formalizing a 3-month period of listening, and we held listening sessions all across the business. We did an allyship training session. We did several where we said, look, given the majority of our workforce are white, but white employees who want to be better allies for people of color within our workforce, how do they become better allies? How do they become better listeners? How can they help to support our underrepresented colleagues in the company? And so we did that for 3 months. And then through the listening sessions, we were able to formulate a plan, which we announced on the 1st of September, along with being transparent around our current demographics. We just showed, here is, based on the census data, this is the diversity of our communities that we serve in New York, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And here is the diversity of our workforce. And it's not a great picture, but we're not going to hide behind it, because we need you to know what our starting point is. And we need you all to lean into the actions that we've just announced in parallel with that, because we're only going to see change in diversifying our workforce and creating a sense of belonging and inclusion within the group. And if we really focus on this. The last thing I will say is one of the challenges is around, we're hiring great diversity at the moment. The challenge is that we are losing diversity in our company as well. And so just to stand still on keeping your diversity numbers flat is actually a challenge for our organization because we're recruiting more millennials and Gen Z employees who are much more transient, much more likely to move around organizations. It's going to become more of a pressing issue post-COVID, when mobile working, remote working is going to be somewhat of a norm for many companies and many professions. So the ability to retain people is going to be more of a challenge. What it does is it also broadens the scope of the talent pool that we can go after, but it will be a challenge. So that's some of our experience. But I think the plan we have now, to Vanessa's point, is very thoughtful. It's very comprehensive, and more importantly, it's representative of what we've heard from our colleagues.
Yeah, thank you. I love that concept of sort of the allyship. I think that's so important, and oftentimes can be overlooked, that sort of people on both sides of the equation need support in order to make positive change. And I also, love your willingness to be vulnerable and have these uncomfortable conversations to drive change. So, Scott, how about you? What have been the biggest challenges or changes for Intuit over the past 6 months?
Yeah, and I'd like to make comments both about social justice and racial equality, as well as our response to and learnings around the COVID pandemic. I first want to say that this is the first time I've met Vanessa and Keith, and I feel like I've met my community. It's like our strategies are so similar and our mindsets are so aligned. It's really fun to be in conversation. As it relates to racial equity, we too took some bold steps after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And we've had the conversations that the CEO staff broadcast to the entire company. Optional attendance, 98% of the company attended, which was like overwhelming. And I have to tell you, very similar to Vanessa and Keith, the pressure I received from members of our CEO staff to, quote, publish our plan, because we saw our tech peers publishing their plans within days of George Floyd's murder. And our approach in DEI is both the what and the how is critical. And come to find out that at many of these tech peers, the Black employees are furious that they were not involved in the formation of the plans that were published. And they're now having to go back to square one and engage employees and redo their planning. And that process of involvement and engagement is absolutely critical. Our roadmap for addressing anti-Blackness and racial equity throughout the entire talent lifecycle is modeled on a paper that you can find online. It's 4 or 5 pages from Dr. Barbara J. Love, called Liberatory Consciousness. And it's a 4-part framework. It begins with acknowledgement, followed by analysis, then action, then accountability. And so many teams jump directly to action. Here's my $1 million check. We're going to invest in our ERGs. We're going to do the following things without really spending time in the richness around analysis. And I love the best practice that was shared this morning about an independent audit. Keith being able to engage people to look at that data and really understand the differences in performance evaluation ratings and promotion and mobility and attrition, and really focusing on a culture of retention. One of the actions that we've taken already out of our work is to hire a director of talent equity, a director level position that is focused on this long term. And we believe it will take 3 to 5 years to truly create a culture that embraces racial differences. And it has been the most difficult area to engage in. Frankly, I don't think this work could have been done a year ago. And very much like Vanessa's comments, we have senior Black leaders saying this is our Super Bowl moment. This is the moment in time when we can affect sustained change. And it's absolutely essential that we be uncomfortable and that we also be very explicit. There have been a few employees who have said, I don't believe in the work that you're doing. And what will be the implications if I post my beliefs and my reactions on social media? And our reaction our point is, if you don't embrace our code of conduct and our values of inclusivity and respect, you need to leave, because this company is not for you. And to be that explicit, if there's a misalignment, we don't want you here. In the area of our response to the COVID pandemic, what we've found in talking to hundreds of employees, beyond compensation and recognition, employees want 3 things. They want to make an impact. They want to make a difference in this world. Second, they want to learn and grow. And third, they want to feel connected. And those things don't change in a COVID environment. The how you achieve those things have to change. Plus, there's the added pressure for many of our employees of being working parents who've now found themselves in the roles of dedicated caregivers as well as homeschool educators. There's that added pressure. And we've made a lot of investments in time off programs and financial support and flexible work schedules in order to help support people that are struggling with that balance in their lives. There are also a number of engineers who've said they have never been more productive in their lives, and they want to work from home on an ongoing basis. And it is fundamentally causing us to rethink our real estate strategy and workplace strategy, asking questions of what is the workplace for? What is the proper use? And we believe that a good portion of our employees will work from home on a long-term basis, or there'll be a hybrid working environment where people will come into the office 1 to 2 days a week and be able to work at home the balance of the week. And I'll tell you, in the Bay Area, where we have a major presence, commute times had been increasing and increasing, and the stress that our employees were feeling because of the commute is causing people to leave the state. And the pandemic, I think, as Vanessa said, brings a silver lining for all of the tragedy that we are witnessing. There are some workplace advantages about the workforce and workplace of the future. We're opening our aperture to where we find talent so that we can engage and retain that talent and grow that talent. In fact, our work from home employees prior to the shelter in place requirements had higher engagement and higher senses of belonging than their on-campus employees, which is really interesting. It's allowing them to build the life that they want, to achieve the balance in their life. And it's really positively affecting our workforce strategies.
Thank you, Scott. You said a lot of really meaningful things, and the 2 that I will absolutely take away are the what and the how are critical. and the need to be explicit. Both of those, I think, are just incredibly important guiding strategies in order to be effective. And thank you for sharing that. We have time for one last question for everyone. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and the host said something that really resonated with me. And she said, "The middle is messy, but the middle is where the magic happens." And the conversation about DE&I is not new. So we're not at the beginning. And Vanessa, I believe you said it before, like we have a long ways to go. These conversations are going to carry on for a long time. And that means that we are squarely in the middle. So I'd love to hear from you on this panel. What do you all see as the magic or the silver linings or the greatest opportunities for DE&I at this time? You've hinted at them, but now I'm just asking you more explicitly. What advice might you offer to others in the DE&I space? So Keith, let's start with you this final round.
Sure. I think the silver lining for me just is the fact that everybody is now willing to be part of the conversation in a way that they weren't before. And I think that affords us so much opportunity to get ideas out on the table, to have a more inclusive conversation, to educate people now that are willing to be educated and understand what their role is. I think for too long, I think for anybody that may not have been affected by or may not be an underrepresented or minority employee within our company, this notion of D&I is somebody else's job, and it's focusing on somebody else, on some other group in the organization. And I think that the events of the last few months have changed that to be very much this is our collective team challenge. We have opportunities, but we all need to be part of this. And so, but my worry, quite honestly, and we saw it in the couple of months after the tragic events of the summer, was that we're all very fickle as well, and we have a very fickle workforce and a very fickle society. And when there are other events that occur, our attention gravitates away from what we all acknowledged was a moment of action, a moment of clarity about something critical that needed to change in our organization and our society. And I worry that sustainability to keep the conversation going in the way that it has been so far will diminish. I think so. The silver lining for me, we can't be complacent. We've got to find a way of making sure that energy and that need to be part of the conversation for everybody is sustained in the long term. Otherwise, the magic will fizzle out very quickly. And we need all of those ideas. We need everybody's participation for as long as possible, because that is just a part of the fabric of organizations now. And that's been great to see how elevated the D&I conversation has now become.
Absolutely. And that truly is a real concern and a real worry. But my hope is that the fact that you are bringing so many more people into the conversation will make it that much stronger and integral to who you are as a company, and will make it that much more a part of the fabric of your organization. Thank you. Scott, how about you? What do you see as some of the great opportunities?
Yeah, I want to go back to the podcast reaction that you had, which is the middle is messy. I had a very different take on that insight or reflection that you had. I thought you were referring to middle management. And I think that the middle is messy. I think that our senior leaders are getting up in front of people, and they're finding their voice, and they're finding the vocabulary, and they are making their expectations and intentions very clear. And frontline employees who have experienced systemic racism and exclusion are finding opportunities to express and to share in a way that's comfortable for them, their experiences. And caught in the middle are managers that have bold, audacious goals that they need to nail, while trying to accommodate flexible schedules for employees that are struggling to care for their families during the pandemic, and not knowing what they are empowered to do, capable to do, and they're struggling with having conversations about racism. And that is the messy middle that we need to be focused on.
That at first I thought I said something offensive, so I'm glad that wasn't the case.
No.
That really raises such an important point, and again, just another spotlight shown on a challenge area that gives us an opportunity to do better. So thank you so much for that, Scott. Vanessa, we'll wrap up with you.
Yeah, so like Scott, I also assumed that you were talking about the frozen middle manager, right, that we all have to deal with. Let's be honest, none of us would be in our roles. Our roles wouldn't exist unless this was a vision of top leadership, right? These roles in organizations don't just happen. It started out that they were the result of litigation, then it became a proactive business imperative. And it usually is aligned with a leadership's vision, right? Whether the board of directors, the CEO, the CEO's direct reports. And then for the first time, we have so many multi-generations in the workplace that have had different experiences with whether with technology, with the way we work. We were talking about millennials for so long, but millennials are now 40 years old, so we can't talk about them like they're kids anymore. So we have this sort of underbelly of diversity and inclusion in the lower levels. We have the leadership vision of wanting to build these inclusive organizations so that we're positioned to attract talent and to innovate and come up with creative ideas. And then you have these managers in the middle who, to Scott's point, are working managers. They're parents, they're dealing with children being home, they have deadlines, goals, and now we're asking them to be inclusive, right? And they don't know what that means. They're frustrated. And now we have moved away from sort of this comfortable race neutral way of approaching diversity of the past to this zeitgeist this summer of having to talk about race, having to have conversations where people generally would just have them with their friends or at dinner parties. We had employees who suddenly found courage to speak up and demand more for themselves, demanding equity and equal opportunities. So this was a moment that if you want to be a successful manager for the future, you can't avoid this moment. The people who I see sort of avoiding this moment are the people who are retiring in the next year. They said, this is not my problem anymore. I don't want to care about it. But this is the first time, I think, for diversity officers where there's a genuine pull from the organization. People are confused, they're scared, they need language to use, they want to know, can I say Black or African American, like what is the right term? I've never been called upon so much as I have this year to really ask for support, ask for training, ask for help. So I think, as diversity officers, we have to think about the long-term sustainability of this moment. How do we use this moment to reset, rethink our strategy, and truly transform our organizations as opposed to transforming people? I think in the past, we were always training people how to fit, how to dress, how to speak, how to communicate. This is a moment where we're now looking at our organizations and saying, how can we fit the people of the future? How can we truly position ourselves to get the best out of people, to get loyalty, to retain talent, to get engagement, to get that magic of performance, high performance that we've always talked about. And so we're really trying to drive this moment into a long-term plan where, yes, we may have to be forceful initially to mandate training and so on, but we're going to drive towards accountability, transparency. To Scott's point, if you're not on this train, you can get off. But this is who we want to be. And so we're asking leaders and managers to really join us in this moment. And for the most part, we're getting positive reactions. There will always be one or two negative emails that we're all getting in our inboxes, but for the most part, there is genuine momentum. I am optimistic, though cautiously, and we're putting the building blocks in place for a long-term impact for our organization.
Thank you. You know, what I think is so interesting too about some of what you were saying is that how this will, thinking about how this will change the company over the long haul and sort of how it's forcing you to think about how you do things differently. Hopefully that will sort of help sustain the momentum and override sort of that fickle nature that people can sometimes display. I also think it was really interesting how, just how we all interpreted the term middle differently, just goes to show how easily it is for different people to interpret similar experiences very differently. So I think that's a great sort of reminder. And so I'll just conclude, because we are out of time, with, first of all, a heartfelt thank you to all of you for being here today. I knew who you all were before you came here today. And so it is no surprise for me to hear you all, talking the way that you are talking. And such an important part of the STEM Connector value proposition is the network and the connections. And I hope that, the three of you have sort of found your people today. I hope that our guests have found each other today. And together, I think we could really work together and do great things. So thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for letting me be a part of this, and to all of you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Nice to meet everyone.